calling from a 262 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Milwaukee.
Milwaukee? What's going on? What's your name?
My name is Dee.
Dee?
I have a lot to say, and I'm sure I only have a few seconds to say it in. I think the biggest thing I want to say, I was listening to the interview with Matt, and people seem to be really sort of stupefied over why Donald Trump is sort of getting the visceral mob mentality that he gets, and I think it's actually pretty simple, but nobody seems to be talking about it, in my opinion. And that is, Donald Trump, I know people are going to say this is totally un-PC of me, but Donald Trump is the other. In spite of all his billions of dollars, give or take a few million, and all of the things he says, he's the one that, even with all his money, couldn't quite buy his way into being respected, accepted, whatever. And his voice resonates with millions of people who feel the same way. And nobody seems to be addressing how easy it would be to sort of welcome those people back to the table in a sensible way instead of, comedy shows sort of make fun of people like that, like you did the thing with Sargon a couple, 2-3 days ago, I think it was, or 2 days ago. And it's fine. I love comedy. I love British humor in particular. Is great at taking the pee out of people, but there's no real sort of sense of saying to these people they have a legitimate place at the table. These are people that work. They pay their taxes. Whether you agree with what they say or don't say, they're largely representative of the other. If I'm making sense, I'm probably not articulating.
No, I think
well.
let me rephrase your argument to you and tell me if I'm doing it justice. And in some ways, you're making it's interesting you cite British comedy, because in some ways you're sort of making this argument that even though Trump is so wealthy, he has an underclass, if you will, or a working class sensibility. And because he's very Queensy, I guess, Queens-ish, I should say, not, from Queens, and that he's got a sort of a blue-collar air to himself, and that on some level that speaks to people who, regardless, can't, are not taken seriously and are left behind by the elites and by the sort of smarter than thous. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yes. And can I add a little bit to that?
Please. I'm just restating your argument.
No, you did great, much more succinctly than I did too. I guess that's why you're the host. But no, I think the other thing is it's not conspiratorial. It's not like there's some big plot, which everybody likes to think of all the time. I think there's no elite that goes around saying, I'm going to make people feel smaller than me or less than me. There's a lot of things you could talk about here. You could go way deep and talk about the psychology of being victimized. And well, let me share a personal anecdote. I think it'll sum me up actually better than all my babbling here. Very personal. I'm not going to go into detail. But when I was a young girl, I was abused. And I was abused by a deacon of my local church. Years later, 30 years later, he had passed away. He'd been heralded as this great hero in the church, and I got a bulletin about what a wonderful man he was, and yada, yada, yada. Of course, that didn't sit well with me, so when my grandmother passed, the pastor of that church did her service, and I made an appointment with him after the funeral to go and talk with him. I didn't have any other agenda than I simply wanted to let him know what had happened to me those 30 years ago. Now, this is when I was a young girl. I'm, an adult now, working, moved basically past it. And the pastor basically said to me in that meeting, well, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but we wouldn't want to upset his family or the church, but thanks for coming. And basically it was a proverbial pat on the head and a kick out the door. And it infuriated me. I didn't want anybody to beat anybody up. I didn't really want anybody to do anything. I wanted to know that I had been heard and that somebody understood it, and if not empathized, sympathized, and cared that had happened to me. That's all I wanted, and I didn't get that. And I think there are millions of people in America right now who feel like they have no political voice. They're laughed at because they can't use the proper framing or words. You can say, how can you vote if you don't know what the three branches of government are, for example? But there are people who They just don't know those things because their situation, their culture, whatever it is. And I think we should be working towards trying to bring them back to the table, and that would be an easy way to make Trump inconsequential.
All right.
Finding a way to make these people feel like they had a voice.
Okay, let me.
Thank you for letting me babble.
All right, no, I mean, I think you have a point, but there's something I want to disagree with you on. I do think it is the case that the people that Trump is resonating with, in some level, experience and are aware of the fact that they're getting screwed in some way. Okay.
Yep.
But the fact is that reality is the reality for a much larger number of people than just those people who are attracted to Donald Trump. Okay? And on some level, maybe it's just simply because they don't know any better or know any other way. And I think that is the most charitable perspective. They articulate and channel and transfer this victimization, and it's legitimate. They are legitimately victims of a system on some level. And I'm broadly speaking here. I mean, you can predict the one group of people in this country whose life expectancy is going the other direction, as opposed to extending, is basically white males age 50 or somewhere around there, in a certain socioeconomic strata, and they're basically killing themselves with drug abuse and alcohol abuse and whatnot, presumably because their lives are miserable, and I think that's real. But the question really is, okay, even if I was charitable enough to say, okay, they're choosing to express this victimization in the only way they know how, which is to victimize other people, which is to say that our enemies are not the people who are really screwing us over, that guy Donald Trump. Even if it's out of sheer ignorance, that the only reason why they're relating to him is because he's expressing their frustration. Now, of course, Donald Trump doesn't have any of these problems. Donald Trump doesn't have to worry that that it's a zero-sum game for him, that women have more opportunity, or that African Americans have more opportunity, or that that minorities have any more opportunity. He doesn't lose. He's not a loser in this. He just expresses it. He just has all the vestiges so that it can actually, and Donald Trump at some level is proof that the way these people express it can live outside of that victimization quite well.
Well,
right? Now,
that's the other side of it.
Well, let me just finish. And so then the question becomes, and I understand that, and many of these people certainly may not realize it. They don't realize that they're making a choice to transfer this anger towards those who are more vulnerable than they are on some level, even though they perceive these people as getting all the largesse and whatnot, that they're not more vulnerable. They are more vulnerable. And even if I'm going to be charitable enough to do that, on a political level, the bottom line is no. The bottom line is we don't need, the reality is that those people, if it is the ignorance that allows them to do this transference, the amount of energy involved in reaching those people is not, if it even can be done, the amount of energy expended in there is wasted energy. The energy that can go other places if you want to make political change. That's my belief. And so
I agree.
So when I mock Argon of Saqqad, and I think he's from a different sort of genre, because the fact is I've seen all his Twitter followers, and to a person, the idea that they were aggressive leftists, what he's basically saying is you're a leftist. None of them are leftists in any fashion whatsoever. They're not of the left. They're of the right. It doesn't matter to me. But I think there's a lot more value in mocking these people, politically speaking, and just simply defeating them.
But Sam, I'm not taking. First of all, can I clarify two things? One, I talked about victimization, and I wasn't being very clear because I'm a little nervous. I don't usually call into podcasts or talk shows, so I wasn't being particularly articulate. But I'm not saying that you give license to the victimization. You still have to. I'm a firm believer in the fact that you have to make choices, and the fact that I'm on the phone with you now, sharing my opinions on this given that story that I told you, tells you that
Right.
I made some different choices about how I think, okay? So I'm not saying that in terms of political expenditure that we should go after soothing the wounds of these victimized people, and I may have given that impression. But what I'm saying to you is I believe there's some relatively simple things we could do that wouldn't require a lot of political expenditure or waste to, at the very least, disenfranchise Trump's message a little bit. And that would be, and I don't care that, I think Bill Maher's hysterical and he kicks the pee out of people all the time, but there's no sort of recompense for these people. You got people like Dawkins talking to people who understand for hundreds of years they grew up, were born in a family that said you believe in a God in the sky and he's going to control your morality, your behavior. And you start to peel away those layers. Some of us get there quicker than others. We could argue probably for 16 conversations about all of the psychology of that. But
well, tell me what you think.
Ground.
I mean, look. I have no problem with people who don't believe in religion, and you know, I don't know, D, if you have transferred that sense of what happened upon you to someone other than the people who really deserve your ire for how you were abused. And because you were abused, and undoubtedly, even decades later, you can see how there are people covering up for it. I mean, the amount of covering up that must have gone on contemporaneously is almost, I think, sickening to imagine. And
it's intolerable, yeah.
But so tell me, what do you think how you would separate Donald Trump from those followers?
Well, okay, one more little anecdote, very short one that will probably answer that best. There was a young girl in our neighborhood who came from a very similar background to mine, sort of probably part of the socioeconomic strata that you're talking about for a lot of Donald Trump's followers, whatever, voters. And there I'm making them another too. But I'm saying she came from that socioeconomic background, and we were in the park one day. She was moving like a gazelle on the park equipment. And I said to her, I'm not going to say her name, you should be a gymnast, hon. And she looked at me, she's 11 years old, and she said, and I come from it's not a poor area, certainly, middle class, typical middle class neighborhood. And she said to me, what's a gymnast? And she's 11, okay? And this is real. This happened not too long ago.
Right.
How can she aspire to be something other than what she is if she doesn't even know that those options are available to her, okay? And so I'm not saying we have to support the victimization of these people or give license to their crazy. You did a really good job with, what's his name? Alex Jones, tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. And you handled him really well. But you need to at least say, okay, I don't agree with some of your thinking, but you have some valid points here. We respect the fact that you work hard and pay your share of taxes. You can have a civil discussion and say something like, look, you might want the lid up, he wants the lid down, but at some point somebody's got to come halfway and sort of meet in the middle. And I don't see any of those sort of
because, you know, I understand your analogy with the gymnast, but I just don't think, I mean, and if I could sit down with every single person who ever voted for Donald Trump and who intends to and walk them through it, but, you know, I have run into those people, even in Brooklyn. And I'll tell you, I don't think it's just a question. They're aware that Bernie Sanders is out there. They're aware that these proposals are out there, but it's going to take a lot more time than we're going to have between now and the end of the year, November, to be honest with you. I mean, I just think that that's not where people should be expending their energy. If it was just enough to say, hey, you know what? You don't really hate Muslims. You don't really hate Latinos. The problem is that for years we have been setting up an economic system that has been basically exploiting you. And when it needs you to fuel the engine, it sucks from you. And when it doesn't, it just expends you like the human body might some other form of nutrition. And I just think that that, you know, I understand what you're saying. And but you know, when I see those, when I see the pictures of the people shoving African American women around at their rally, my first thought isn't, boy, they really don't really understand why they're so angry.
Yeah.
And I think, and I understand not everybody's like that at there, but I've been wading through the sea at a Glenn Beck 9/12 rally or whatever it was, and I'll tell you something. There's a lot of lunacy and a lot of ignorance, and on some level, like, we've got to do some broader projects that aren't going to take their support to implement, frankly. That it's going to be done despite their resistance. That's my hope. But I appreciate the phone call, Dee. I really do.
Thank you for your time. I enjoy the show.
Thanks. That was a great call. I enjoyed that call quite a bit.